When Julia stepped through the front door of her parents' house, she expected warmth, a gentle welcome, maybe a hug. But what she got was a distracted wave from her father, a silent nod from her mother, and the sound of Lacy laughing upstairs like the queen she'd always been in this house. Julia was 8 months pregnant, swollen, exhausted, and holding on to the hope that this place, this house, would feel like a refuge. Her husband Mason had to travel for work, and her parents had insisted, "Stay with us, sweetie, we want to take care of you." But by the end of the first day, that promise felt more like a setup. Her mother Marjorie kept walking on eggshells, not for Julia, but for Lacy. Her father Charles spent dinner glued to his phone, only looking up to remind Julia not to be too emotional around her sister. And Lacy didn't even pretend to care. She floated through the house in silk robes, posing for selfies, sipping detox tea, and telling anyone who'd listen, "I have a huge shoot coming up. I can't have anything disrupt my aura." Julia slept in the guest room. She told herself, "It's just for a week. I can handle this." But deep down, something already felt wrong. This wasn't home. This was Lacy's castle. And Julia, she wasn't a guest. She was a disturbance. The next morning, Julia was woken, not by alarm, but by the sound of wind chimes and incense. Lacy was meditating on the balcony, in a flowing white robe surrounded by rose quartz sage and 3 ring light stands. "It's for the shoot," she whispered to her phone, recording herself mid-zen. Julia tiptoed into the kitchen, hoping for a cup of tea and 5 minutes of peace. But peace wasn't hers to have. Her mother greeted her with a sharp finger pressed to her lips. "Shh, Lacy's aligning her energy." Julia blinked. "I'm just boiling water," she replied softly. "Even the kettle disrupts her theta waves," her mom snapped. Her dad looked up from the living room and added, "Try not to move too much around her. You know how sensitive she is before a big campaign." Julia stood frozen, mug in hand. This was her family's version of love. Now silence, for Lacy, submission from everyone else. She wasn't allowed to cough, laugh, walk too heavily, or use scented lotion. Everything that made Julia real was suddenly too much. And what made Lacy divine was everyone pretending not to notice the absurdity. Julia sat on the porch alone that evening, her belly heavy, her breath shallow. In a house where energy ruled, she didn't have space to exist. The first contraction hit Julia like a silent punch. She was folding baby clothes in the guest room, humming softly to herself when the pain gripped her lower back like a vice. She froze, bent forward, hands on the dresser, breathing through her teeth. Then she called out, "Mom!" A few seconds later, Marjorie appeared at the door, arms crossed, face cold. "Are you sure it's real?" she asked flatly. "Don't exaggerate, sweetheart. Lacy's meditating." Julia's mouth fell open, not in shock, but in realization. This wasn't about disbelief. This was about priorities, and she wasn't one. She nodded slowly, said nothing. Then she texted her OB/GYN. "Start timing them," the doctor replied. So Julia did. 7 minutes apart, then 5, then 4. With each wave of pain, she dug her nails into her palms. With each contraction, the air in the house felt thinner. No one knocked on her door. No one asked how she was. Lacy continued to align her aura. Her parents continued to respect the calm. And Julia, she was starting to understand she could go into labor in the middle of that living room, and they'd still tell her to whisper. "Dad," Julia said, clutching the doorframe, "I think it's time. The contractions are 4 minutes apart." Charles didn't even look up. He was standing in the kitchen, slowly stirring sugar into his coffee like nothing urgent had just been said. "Can't you wait a little?" he mumbled. Julia's breath caught. What? He finally glanced over his shoulder. "Lacy's about to do her breathing exercises," he said. As if that explained everything. As if Julia's pain had to be scheduled around Lacy's yoga. "I'm having contractions," Julia said, voice cracking. She bent over the counter, gripping the edge as another wave hit. "And you always make things dramatic," he muttered, sipping his coffee. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was cruel. And Julia, still clinging to some tiny hope that they would eventually see her, packed her hospital bag in silence. She grabbed her phone, her ID, her dignity, then waited by the door for 20 agonizing minutes. No one rushed. No one asked if she was okay. They got into the car like they were headed to brunch. Julia sat in the back seat, pressing her fingers into her thighs, praying she'd make it in time. The road ahead was long, but she didn't know the real betrayal was just 10 minutes away. The car ride was only supposed to last 25 minutes, but to Julia, it felt like a lifetime. She sat in the back seat, gripping the handle above the window, rocking slightly with each contraction. Her face was pale. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Her breaths came out in short, sharp bursts. "She's going to scream the whole way," her father muttered from the driver's seat. "It's stressing me out," her mother added, pressing 2 fingers to her temples. "I have a headache already." Julia wanted to cry, not because of the pain, but because she wasn't allowed to feel it. Every wince, every moan, every breath was treated like an inconvenience. Her pain didn't fit the family aesthetic. "People give birth every day," her mom murmured, like she was reading a quote off a mug. "You're not the first woman to go through this." Julia clenched her fists and looked out the window. Cars rushed past on both sides. And just when she thought they were almost there, her father took an exit, onto a shoulder, middle of nowhere, nothing but dust, trees, and the hum of highway traffic. "What are we doing?" Julia gasped. Her mother turned around, sunglasses still on. "Lacy needs peace and silence today," she said calmly. "We'll call you a cab." The car door shut behind her with a thud that echoed louder than traffic. Julia stood on the side of the highway, one hand gripping the door handle that had just been taken from her. "Wait, what are you doing?" she gasped. Her father looked straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. Her mother, still turned toward her in the front seat, smiled faintly. "Sweetheart," she said, calm as ever, "you'll be fine. People have babies in taxis all the time." Julia's hands trembled. Another contraction hit stronger this time. She dropped to a knee, clutching her belly. "You're really leaving me here? It's not the right day for this," her mom added. "Lacy's mental state can't handle chaos right now." The car shifted into gear. "Call the cab. It'll be here soon," her father mumbled. And then they drove away. Julia remained, bent over on the gravel shoulder, alone, screaming. Cars flew past like blurs, none of them stopping. Her phone shook in her hand as she tried to dial. Her voice cracked. Her legs wobbled. Sweat beaded down her spine. The world didn't pause. The pain didn't wait. And her family didn't look back. That was the moment Julia knew they weren't coming back for her, and she'd never go back for them. Julia didn't remember how she got the app open. Her hands were shaking too hard. But somehow she ordered the Uber. Her location, Highway 39 South near mile marker 48. A name popped up on the screen, Maggie Toyota Camry, 2 minutes away. Julia was crouched on the gravel when the car pulled up. The door flew open, and a woman with curly salt and pepper hair leaned out. "Are you Julia?" Julia nodded, teeth clenched. "Get in, honey. We've got you." Maggie didn't ask questions. She didn't flinch at the screams. She turned the heat up, rolled the windows up, and gave Julia her hand. "You hold on tight now. You squeeze as hard as you want." At every red light, Julia gripped Maggie's fingers like they were the last rope to life. "Breathe with me, baby girl. Just breathe." Her voice was soft, warm, like sunlight pouring through panic. In 25 minutes, they reached the hospital. Julia was wheeled in, panting, crying, whispering only one name, Maggie. No paperwork, no payment, no goodbye. Just a quiet woman who saw pain and stayed. The delivery room was sterile and cold, but not colder than the absence of her family. Julia gripped the rails of the hospital bed as a contraction tore through her body. There was no one holding her hand, no one pacing the room, no one whispering, "You've got this." Just a nurse, mid-30s, kind eyes, trembling voice telling her, "Okay, sweetie, you're almost there. Just one more push." Julia screamed, not just from pain, but from the crushing weight of abandonment. Her voice echoed off the walls, and no one came running. Not her mother, not her father, not even a call. But in that silence, something was born. Not just the baby, but a shift, a fire, a promise. When they placed the tiny girl in her arms, Julia looked down at her and whispered, "Your name is Lyanna, and you will never, ever feel the way I feel right now." Her arms trembled, her eyes burned, but her voice steady. "You will never be someone's afterthought. Not while I'm alive." That night, Julia didn't just give birth to a daughter, she gave birth to her own resurrection. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet. Julia sat propped up in bed, baby Lyanna sleeping on her chest. Machines beeped, curtains swayed, and still no one had come. No flowers, no calls, just a postpartum haze and a growing emptiness that no morphine could numb. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Hope everything went okay. Lacy says congrats, BTW." That was it. "No. How are you?" "No. Is the baby healthy?" "No. We're sorry we left." Just a vague wish and a forwarded congratulations. Julia stared at the screen like it had slapped her. Not because it was mean, but because it was so emotionally vacant. Like they were commenting on the weather. As if childbirth was just a Tuesday update. As if her screaming, sobbing, bleeding didn't even register. Julia gently shifted Lyanna to her shoulder. Her lips trembled. And all she could whisper was, "Never again." 3 days after Lyanna was born, the hospital room door opened, and in walked Mason, his hair messy from the red-eye flight, his eyes scanning the monitors, the baby, the woman he loved, and the tension in the air. Julia. She didn't cry. She didn't fall into his arms. She just looked at him, and that look told him everything. Still, he stepped forward. "Why didn't anyone call me?" Julia exhaled. Her voice was flat but heavy. "Because there was no one left to call." She explained it all. The silence, the car ride, the shoulder of the highway, the part where her own mother told her people give birth in taxis all the time. Mason stared at her like she was saying the earth was flat. Then his jaw clenched. "I'll talk to them," he said quietly. "No one does this to you, not even your family." Julia shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "Why? Because if I go to war with them..." She looked down at Lyanna, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Then I have to win. And to win, she needed a plan." 2 weeks after coming home from the hospital, Julia was sorting through a pile of mail when she noticed an envelope that didn't make sense. No return address, no logo, just her name, Julia Autumn Faye, printed in all caps. She tore it open casually. Inside was a letter from the bank. Subject line, active mortgage, $218,000. Julia blinked. It had to be a mistake. She didn't own a home. She hadn't signed a thing. Her hands started shaking as she read further. Loan issued 2 months ago. Closing date, same week she gave birth. A house in the next county, 2 stories, modern finish, and her name was on every page. Full signature, social security number. It wasn't a mistake. It was identity theft. Her blood ran cold. She sat down trembling. Someone had stolen her name. Someone had used her pain and absence to build something behind her back. And she already knew exactly who. Lacy. Julia opened her laptop with fingers still trembling. She logged into her bank account, then cross-checked with the lender listed in the letter. There it was. Mortgage account #71309-A active. She clicked into the file and waited. A scanned copy of the mortgage packet popped up on screen. Page after page, and her name was on every one. But here's the thing. She didn't sign them. She hadn't held a pen. She had been on bed rest, barely able to walk, let alone go sign closing documents. But the signature was nearly perfect. Her full legal name scribbled in the same loop-in cursive she'd used since high school. Whoever did this knew her. Then she saw it. Buyer, Lacy Autumn Fay. Co-signers, Marjorie Fay, Charles Fay. Her parents, her own flesh and blood. Julia's hand shot to her mouth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was collusion. They hadn't just abandoned her. They had used her name, her credit, her silence, to give Lacy a house while Julia bled alone in a hospital bed. Julia didn't cry. Not this time. Her hands were shaking, her stomach knotted, her pulse pounding in her ears, but her eyes stayed dry. She closed her laptop, picked up her phone, and stared at the contact list. Then she dialed. "This is Julia Fay. I need to report identity theft involving my own family." The words came out slow, but each syllable carried weight. The voice on the other end asked for details. Julia provided names, dates, amounts. She even mentioned her medical records, the fact that she was in the hospital with documented preeclampsia the exact week the mortgage papers were supposedly signed. The lawyer paused. "You may have a civil case here," he said, "and possibly criminal." Julia's fingers tightened around the phone. Not just betrayal, this was fraud. And for the first time in weeks, Julia didn't feel powerless. She felt focused. Julia didn't storm into her parents' house. She didn't scream. She didn't post. She studied. For the next 2 weeks, while feeding Lyanna and healing in silence, she became a quiet machine. First, she requested her full medical records from the hospital, proof of her condition, dates of her hospitalization, time-stamped vitals. Then she requested copies of the mortgage documents from the bank in higher resolution. She enlarged the signatures. She printed everything. Then she began highlighting. Inconsistencies in pen pressure, slight slants that didn't match her real handwriting. Then came the phone records. She dug through voicemails from her parents. In one, her father literally said, "We thought it was just a formality. You weren't using your credit." She clipped the audio, backed it up, filed it under Exhibit A. Then she opened a private folder on her laptop, named it Operation Mercy. No more tears, just timelines, evidence logs, voice memos. Julia was done being quiet in pain. Now she would be quiet in power. The invitation came in a gold envelope, hand-delivered, embossed. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Lacy Autumn Fay's first billboard campaign," it read in swirling script. The date was circled. The venue, a private hall uptown, complete with a rooftop view. And the name printed on the card, Miss Julia Fay. Like nothing had happened. No mention of the hospital, no mention of the highway, no mention of the stolen house. Just a glittering facade of family unity. Julia stared at the card for a long time. Her mother had even scrawled a little note at the bottom. It would mean the world to Lacy if you came. Would it? Julia didn't RSVP. She didn't say a word. But she marked the date in her phone. Not as a guest, not as a sister, but as a woman preparing to end the lie. Julia walked into the rooftop ballroom exactly 20 minutes after the party started. She wore black, no makeup, no jewelry, just purpose. The room was buzzing with laughter and champagne flutes. A massive screen displayed Lacy's face airbrushed, perfect, beaming above the skyline. Julia spotted her immediately. Lacy was in silver sequins, drink in hand, surrounded by people who had no idea what kind of person she really was. Her mother turned, gasped. "Julia," she breathed, arms half raised for a hug. Julia didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She opened her bag, pulled out 3 thick manila envelopes, each labeled in her handwriting. One for Marjorie Fay, one for Charles Fay, one for Lacy Autumn Fay. She handed them out one by one. Her mother stared at the packet like it was ticking. "What is this?" Lacy scoffed. "A gift." Julia's voice was calm. "The kind you gave me when I was in labor." Lacy's smile faltered. The music kept playing, but the party had stopped. The 3 of them stared down at the envelopes. Lacy flipped hers open, eyes narrowing as she skimmed through the lawsuit. Fraud, identity theft, complicity. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers. The glass hit the floor, shattered. The music kept playing, but the room fell into a hush. Julia didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She stood still, steady, and that made it all the more terrifying. Her mother stepped forward, whispering, not angry, just broken. "You're destroying the family." Julia turned to her. Her eyes were calm, her jaw firm, and then she answered, "No, I'm ending the lie. That's all. No explanation, no debate, just one sentence." And then she turned and walked away, leaving behind the glitter, the music, and the people who had mistaken silence for surrender. The champagne flute hit the floor and exploded into glass confetti. No one moved. A single note from the DJ's playlist kept looping in the background, but the room was frozen. All eyes turned to Julia. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. Lacy's fingers hovered in midair as if still holding something that had already shattered. One man, someone from the agency, leaned in toward another guest and whispered, "Wait, is this real?" Julia didn't need to answer. The papers were in their hands. Legal documents, lawsuits, consequences. Her father looked like a ghost. Her mother's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The crowd stepped back, not out of fear, out of recognition. They weren't looking at a jealous sister anymore. They were looking at a woman who had been wronged and chose not to stay silent. Julia turned, walked toward the exit, one step at a time. And behind her, the music restarted. But the illusion was over. It took 7 months. 7 months of depositions, signed affidavits, paper trails, and courtrooms that smelled like old carpet and cold coffee. But on a rainy Tuesday morning, the verdict came in. The judge glanced down at the paperwork, then looked up over his glasses. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Julia Fay. Lacy's legal team looked deflated. Her parents sat motionless. Julia didn't cheer. She just closed her eyes. Debt erased. House title restored. Criminal charges recommended for fraud and identity theft. But what hit her most wasn't the judgment. It was when the clerk leaned in, handing her a thick stack of stamped documents and said, "You fought for yourself. That's rare." Julia walked out of the courthouse into the gray drizzle, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like an afterthought. She felt free. The keys were in her hand. The house was officially hers, signed, sealed, notarized. The realtor smiled. "It's a beautiful property. You could get top dollar renting it." Julia stared at the white siding, the wraparound porch, the neat little mailbox that still had her forged name on it. She shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want it." The realtor blinked. "Excuse me?" Julia turned. "Sell it. All of it." Every room, every tile, every memory they tried to buy with lies. The agent hesitated. "You'll walk away from all this money?" Julia's answer was calm. I'm not walking away. I'm walking forward. That night, she transferred every cent of the sale. Not to a bank, not to a personal account, but to a newly opened foundation, Lyanna's Mercy, a shelter for mothers who had been abandoned, silenced, or left alone like she was. Because sometimes healing isn't about winning. It's about choosing what kind of person you become once you do. It started with one room, a dusty old daycare facility that hadn't been used since the pandemic. Julia walked through it in silence. Broken cribs, faded murals, a cracked rocking chair. But to her, it wasn't broken. It was waiting. She rolled up her sleeves, painted the walls, replaced every crib with her own hands. And above the front door, she hung a wooden sign, Lyanna's Mercy, a name that meant grace without condition. The center opened 3 weeks later, quietly, no press, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. But they came, one by one. Women carrying babies, dragging suitcases, shaking from fear and trauma. Julia greeted every single one the same way. You're not a burden. You're home now. They didn't know her story. They didn't need to. Because when you build something from pain, the right people always find their way to it. It was 11:42 p.m. The street outside was quiet. The lights in Lyanna's Mercy glowed soft and warm, like a heartbeat in the dark. Julia was cleaning a spill in the kitchen when she heard the knock. Not urgent, not frantic, just desperate. She opened the door. A girl, maybe 20, holding a baby wrapped in a towel. Her eyes were wide with exhaustion. Her voice trembled. I don't know who else to call. I don't have anyone. Julia didn't ask questions. She reached out, took the woman's hand, and gently pulled her inside. Yes, you do, she said softly. You have us. And I know what it feels like to think no one sees you, to think pain makes you invisible. That's why this place exists. The woman's knees buckled. She cried without sound. Julia held her until her breathing slowed, one arm cradling the baby, one hand holding the mother's. That night, Julia didn't just welcome a guest. She welcomed her own healing. First came the silence. Not from Julia, from the world. Lacy's agency dropped her. Her face vanished from skincare ads, her name erased from sponsor pages. Brands didn't want betrayal in lip gloss. Then came the excuses. An email from her mother. You know how sensitive Lacy is. We were only trying to keep things peaceful. A voicemail from her father. It all got out of hand. Let's just talk. You're still our daughter. Another email. A handwritten letter. A message left with the receptionist at Lyanna's Mercy, all saying the same thing. Let's move past this. We miss you. But Julia didn't miss them. She missed who she used to hope they'd be, and that version was long dead. She didn't respond. She didn't reply. Not because she was angry, but because she finally understood her own worth. Some people write letters hoping to be forgiven. Julia let their words sink in silence. The next letter came in a pale blue envelope. Julia didn't open it for 3 days. She left it on the counter, untouched, like something that smelled of old perfume and older lies. When she finally read it, it said, "Sweetheart, we honestly thought it was just a formality. You know how these things work. We didn't read everything." And in that moment, Julia didn't feel rage. She felt insulted. Her social security number, her forged signature. The mortgage they took in her name. A formality. Then came the voicemail from her father. "Julia, if you don't drop this lawsuit, we could lose everything. Think about your sister. Think about your mother." Julia played it once, then deleted it. They thought guilt would work. Then they thought fear would work. But what they didn't know was that Julia had already lost everything once, and now she had nothing left to lose except her silence, and that she was done giving. It was a Tuesday. The sky was overcast, the kind that made the building lights flicker on early. Julia was restocking diapers in the front lobby of Lyanna's Mercy when she glanced through the tinted glass and froze. A familiar car, silver Lexus. her father's, parked across the street, engine off. Inside, she could see them, her mother in the passenger seat, clutching a cardigan, her father staring at the building like it held everything they'd lost. They didn't get out. They didn't wave. They just watched. For 20 minutes. Julia didn't hide. She didn't wave back. She walked to the glass doors, stood tall, and stared at them, her baby Lyanna cradled in one arm. Her message was clear. You watched me suffer. Now you can watch me survive without you. Then she turned away. The door clicked shut behind her. They didn't come back the next day, but Julia knew that for once in their lives, they were finally listening. The next Saturday, they came again. This time, the car didn't just sit across the street. It rolled forward slowly and stopped in front of the shelter. Julia had just stepped out for a breath of fresh air with Lyanna in her arms. She saw the car, and she knew. Her mother's eyes were glassy. Her father looked 20 years older. But Julia didn't walk toward them. She didn't wave. She didn't scream. She lifted her daughter higher, gently, like holding the only truth that ever mattered, and whispered into the soft morning air, "You left me in labor. I left you to learn what pain truly means." Then she turned to Lyanna and smiled, and we are just getting started. The wind caught the hem of her dress as she stepped back inside the shelter. Behind her, the car slowly pulled away. Not with drama, not with noise, but with the quiet of people who finally understood, too late. Some betrayals don't need revenge. They need boundaries. Julia's story isn't just about being abandoned. It's about refusing to let that abandonment define her. Sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. But healing doesn't mean going back. It means building something stronger away from them. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your blood. You owe yourself peace. You owe your children protection. And you owe your future the courage to say enough, because the moment you stop begging for love and start standing in your truth, that's the moment your story begins to change. If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or forced to smile through pain, then you're not alone. This channel is for voices like yours. So subscribe, turn on the bell, and let's build a space where stories like Julia's don't get ignored, they get heard. And if you know someone who needs this story, share it, because healing begins when silence ends.